Cool. Right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our penultimate session in this theatre this afternoon. I am David Stubbings, news editor at Vale, and I am joined by Richard Hines, His Majesty's Chief Inspector of Railways. And we're going to spend the next half an hour or so talking about rail safety as the industry goes through this massive period of change. So you've been in the job now for, I think, it's a couple of years?
It's 2 years next week.
Flown by?
2 years. Flown by. Yeah, absolutely.
We'll get, because we've got half an hour, we'll get, and so, as I said, we're going to talk about rail safety during this period of reform. So I, first of all, was going to just talk to us about the benefits and risks during this period of change, and how will these risks, change as the industry progresses towards like a single nationalised entity, but with some private operators still there as well.
Yeah, I'll do my best for that. It's really nice to see so many people, so thanks ever so much for coming along for this. We're competing with Andrew Hines, aren't we? I think. So I'm going to take this as a victory, to be honest. Good to see you all. So I think the clue is in your question, David. So I do actually think GBR presents huge opportunity for us in health and safety terms. I think some of the really challenging kind of interface risks that we have across the system are the things that we really struggle with as an industry. So things like overspeed, things like platform train interface, things like SPADs are sometimes issues where things can fall between the gap, quite literally. Having everything under one roof, as it were, one kind of directing mind, gives the opportunity to kind of close some of those gaps and work together and come at some of those issues. I think that when you look back over time, the rail industry doesn't always have a great track record with managing change, which is why I think there are lots of risks around this from a practical perspective. So for me, the priority is on the people on the front line, you guys really, that work out in the industry, being focused, laser focused on your safety critical duties at a time of change. There's lots of conversations about structures, about organisations, about leadership. All of that is really important, and we're playing our part in that. But what's important for industry is that people on the front line clearly understand what they need to do, because whether it's the last day of the current regime or the first day of GBR, we need people on the front line to deliver those health and safety responsibilities. And we'll probably come on in a bit to some of the kind of instances of the past, David, and things that have happened and what we're doing to safeguard that. But we need to be really vigilant. Really, really vigilant, because a lot is changing, okay? The industry is coming together under one unified leadership structure with GBR, but we have to remember also there are parts of the system that will not be within GBR. So things like the freight sector, for example, open access operators, they won't be part of this new world, and it's really important that they're not forgotten. They play an integral part in the system. So it's everyone that needs to be part of it, not just those within that new GBR kind of entity.
Yeah. And you touched on it there. So obviously, it's about 30 years since we had the last massive, and which is in the opposite direction of what we're doing now. And in that sort of period in the late 90s, early 2000s, there were a lot of major accidents. So, are there lessons that can be learned from that, even though the reorganisation was different, to ensure that the safety is not compromised and that focus remains over the next few years?
Yeah, and I'm just going to reflect on one thing then. So I was at a leadership event a couple of weeks ago with a group of graduates, and I mentioned Ladbroke Grove. And some of that group didn't know what Ladbroke Grove was. It is literally a generation ago for some people. And those lessons from the past, they might be fixed in the minds of some people in this room, and they're certainly fixed in the mind of the regulator, but there is a whole workforce out there, maybe parts of this room, that do not know what Ladbroke Grove, what Hatfield, some of those incidents really involved. So it's incumbent on us as a regulator and as an industry with our stakeholders to kind of make sure that those lessons and that learning from the past isn't lost. I think I said previously there's huge opportunity with GBR. I genuinely believe that. We've got people working on this, crafting new safety management systems, thinking about all of the things that make the railways safe today and what needs to continue in the past. But there's an opportunity to really make a step change, I think. And those shared system risk issues are the places and the kind of issues that I think we've got the real potential to address. The kind of sometimes siloed mindset between infrastructure managers and operators needs to change. And I think overspeed is my generation's challenge, equivalent to what you've described in the late 80s and the 90s around sort of SPADs and some of those really nasty incidents. So there's work going on now to craft the new safety management system for GBR. We've got sort of two roles in that, really. The first thing is the formal statutory role, and that's where we have to provide a safety authorisation and a safety certificate to the new organisation, whatever it looks like in whatever structure, to operate the railway. That's got to be in place from day one. That's a high-level assessment of the safety management system for that organisation, and it's going to have to tick all of the criteria that we insist on under the law to be able to safely operate the railway. But I think as part of that, it's about where control sits. That's what the law requires. It's the control of the railway, and we've got to be really clear that that control can be demonstrated wherever it sits in terms of the design of the system. So I think there are things from the past that we need to remember. I think the connection with the front line, though, is the thing that I'm really focused on. Lots of stuff in design at high level. What's the connection with the people out in the front line? That's the thing that needs to be maintained through this change.
Yeah. I just want to go back to, you mentioned some of the workforce, younger folk, may not have heard of Ladbroke. Is it sort of important then that, you know, even if people come through and they've not heard of it and they are from a generation that there is still, you know, that's part of the education, you know, these incidents are sort of brought into training and that to help, you know, just remind people, and so that's, you know, those risks are not forgotten and they're always at the forefront of mind.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if people know Greg Morse at the Railway Safety and Standards Board. You might have seen him on LinkedIn. He does some really excellent stuff in terms of incidents that happen across the world, in fact, and they learns from that. And there's a whole repository of information around Ladbroke Grove, those incidents that happened. And don't forget, the way we're structured now in terms of the regulator, the Safety and Standards Board, and the Accident Investigation Branch all arises because of what happened in those incidents in the late 90s. Lord Cullen conducted an inquiry into those incidents, and it's a deliberate decision to structure us as the way we are. We've got the Accident Investigation Branch that is independent. It's not confined to the requirements of the law in terms of the recommendations that it makes. It can go beyond that, and that's really important. We've got a Safety and Standards Board that defines, you know, standards across the board that the industry should meet in assistance with meeting legal requirements. And then you've got the regulator that holds the duty holder to account for the delivery of compliance with the law. That's a deliberate tension in the system, and our job is to act as the clutch almost between what RAID might require in terms of a recommendation and what can be delivered in terms of what's reasonably practicable. Because the law doesn't require everything at all costs. There's got to be some sensible decision making around what can be done. And there's been some good work done recently to kind of understand what tools, what techniques can help us make those kind of decisions in the industry. So things like cost-benefit analysis, for example, is a really helpful thing to have for really complex decisions that might require a bit more thought.
Yeah. You've mentioned overspeeds, and so maybe just sort of focusing on sort of the next 12 months. What else are sort of the priority areas for you over the next year or so, and why have you honed in on those? Yeah,
so I'm going to make no apologies for talking about overspeed several times in this talk, because I'm really unhappy with industry's performance on overspeed, and I've been quite challenging, I think, of both the infrastructure manager, operators, and others too, because there has not been enough done to mitigate this risk, and I sit here really concerned about it. There is good progress. There's been an acknowledgement that more needs to be done, but it needs to have pace. And the thing I want to see is not more models, theories, and tools. What I want to see is interventions on the front line on the railway that make a difference. At the minute, we don't have that. And you will probably have seen recent incidents that happened where, again, there has been overspeed events that have kind of thrown passengers around and been possibly quite close to a derailment. That just can't continue, and we've got to step up and deal with that. I think we'll always have a presence on catastrophic train accident risk. So things like SPADs, things like overspeed are really important. Platform train interface continues to be a challenging area. We have a number of incidents every year where people are caught up in trains that are being dispatched and end up being hurt and injured. I think beyond that, I was chatting to Martin and Pretty from Network Rail before this. You know, we've got a Victorian infrastructure here, 150 years old, that we are expecting to stand up to modern standards. Extreme weather is not something that we're looking ahead to, is it? It's here and it's now, and the industry has got to stand up to that and be maintained in a safe condition. So civil integrity, structural assessments, all of those things are really important. I think now engineers tend not to carry toolboxes, but they have laptops. So digital safety is a huge issue. We've invested in capability to kind of help us with that, and we've got some work coming to deliver a new strategic risk chapter to give industry some support with that. I think the health agenda is really important too. So the visible stuff around safety is there, and everyone can visualise major accidents. You can see the pictures, but the slow burn of health effects on the workforce is really important. Welding fume was reclassified about 5 years ago as being carcinogenic. Okay, so mild steel welding fume is carcinogenic. That's a change in terms of its classification. It needs a step up in terms of risk control, things like extraction, things like suppression, taking the person away from the activity. Welfare is something I've been particularly focused on as well. How can it be that we've got an industry where people have to pee in a hard hat, for example, where they have to use a bag for purposes it was never intended for? Why do female colleagues have to change period products on the side of the line? That is not compatible with a modern workforce, and it's not a set of values that I think the industry wants to take forward and should take forward. We're never going to attract the brightest talent to this industry if we don't solve some of these hygiene factors. So those sorts of things I think have got to be addressed, David.
Yeah. Have you, I mean, if we just stick with the hygiene, I mean, ASLEF has talked about that for a number of years. Is there any sign of sort of there is progress being made, or is it sufficiently quick, or do you think pace can, that pace can be improved?
So I think there has been progress made. So if you look at where we were a year ago, there was no clear industry commitment to kind of drive forward progress on this issue. Since we had the welfare event on the back of that report that you've mentioned, there's been 26 companies sign a welfare charter with the Railway Safety and Support. That's a direction of travel. That's a commitment to work together. That's the commitment to share facilities, for example, and invest in locations that make the most difference. So freight services, for example, there will be some locations where multiple operators operate over. That's the place we need to target the investment. I think there are some practical things that have been delivered. I've seen some examples of investment in welfare facilities that are really good. And provide people with a really good, clean environment to, go to the toilet, wash their hands, have their lunch, all of those things. But, if this was an easy problem, it would have been solved long before I came to this job. And it is really knotty. There's an event next week, actually, in London, 1 year on, that's being convened by the Railway Safety and Standards Board to kind of reflect on the good progress that's been made, but also a bit of a call of action to get on with the next steps. So again, David, this is about practical frontline things that improve outcomes for people that work in these conditions. Yeah. Having a risk assessment that says, go to the local Costa at 3 o'clock in the morning in the back end of Beyond doing overhead line refurbishment work ain't going to cut it, quite frankly. So, what's set out in terms of a work pack and arrangements has got to be achievable on the front line. They're the kind of practical things that make a difference to people probably in this room that have to go out in the middle of the night and perhaps don't have the facilities that should be available to them.
Yeah. Because I'm conscious of time, we want to do some audience questions at the end. So, I mean, earlier, so a couple of months ago, we published guiding principles for GBR's health and safety management system. So, what happens next now that you've produced that?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned that we've got two roles here. So the first is definitely to deliver the statutory obligations that we have to under ROGS. So the safety certificate, safety authorization, that's an independent, objective assessment against criteria. And if it's not met, those documents aren't issued. Okay, and that's something I'll be absolutely straight about, and I'll play it with a really straight bat because that's important. It's got to meet the expectations, and I won't be moved on that. I think, though, as a regulator, we are quite privileged in that we get to see every safety management system that the industry has across the piece, because we do this for all companies. So we've got, I think, some really valuable insight and experience on the things that work really well in terms of safety management systems and this process we have to go through. So we're leaning into the design work and supporting Network Rail, DFTO, other colleagues that are doing this work to kind of share that experience and to make sure this is set to succeed. That's what an enabling regulator should do. It's not just about the hard line that we have to follow with the formal things that we have to do. We have to collaborate, and we do a huge amount of that on the left-hand side of that line. So there's ongoing conversations at the minute about how do we structure this, how do we organise it, what do we need to demonstrate to meet ROGS. And this document, I think, is a really early kind of engagement piece from us to set out what we think is important in that. You've got to meet the whole criteria. But we are particularly focused on specific areas, and that's what this document seeks to do. It's to help people that are doing this work and to help guide that process. We want to support this. I mean, there's real benefit in this, and it's now our interest as a regulator to make sure it works, so we're leaning into it.
Yeah. And then the current business plan for the 26-27 says OOI is committed to further developing our health and safety regulatory compatibility. And there's a reference to recruiting 10 new inspectors, but what else does that sort of little quote I just said, what does that mean in terms of what else you'll be
Who's read our business plan? Absolutely outrageous, not one single hand. All right. So I don't blame you necessarily. So one of the things I'm focused about is making sure we're fit for the next 10 years as a regulator. We've talked a bit about how industry is changing, about new technology, about how the risk profile is changing across the system in the context of weather, ageing infrastructure. The regulator's got to be fit and ready to regulate for the next 10 years and beyond. So my internal regulatory excellence programme is about achieving just that. And you've mentioned 10 new trainee inspectors. They joined us in February. They're here today. Some of my team are in the audience too. So this is the next generation of inspectors. This is about us training people to regulate the future industry. We've got our own NEBOSH accredited diploma that we run for colleagues. We put them through a sort of 3-year programme to become inspectors. We take people from a really diverse range of backgrounds, some from industry, infrastructure operators, and then some from with comparable skills that can be transferred across. And that diversity is super important. One of the things I'm really proud about on our workforce is that we are a 48-52% split female-male. Okay? That is quite unusual in railway terms, and I think we don't say enough about that sometimes. But this programme is about making us fit for the future, and we'll be taking another 3 trainee inspectors next year, and we've just closed the advert for 5 inspector assistants too. So, you know, our workforce demographic is not dissimilar to industries. Okay, we've got a lot of people that are in the 55 plus age bracket that can make decisions at particular points. We've got to manage that, and we've got to lead it because, you know, we want to see industry succeed. We want to see GBR land well, and we've got to regulate it effectively. We need the tools to do that, and that includes our people. Yeah,
and does that include things that digital and having to sort of that, and you know, there's sort of a bit of AI sort of. There's a couple of, you know, here this week there are a couple of companies that work on AI. So are you having to get people in to help on that, and you know, with expertise on that aspect as well?
Yeah, we do. We've got our own capability on digital safety. So we've got a head of operations that leads on that, and we've got a couple of things coming. So a new strategy and a strategic risk chapter, which is our guidance really on digital safety. But we have to do more. We have to recognise that's a changing risk. It's a thing that's evolving on the network, and we've got to stand up to that. I think the reality is we will probably never have the entire capability to regulate everything to do with AI that we'd ever expect. I just don't think we're ever getting to that point. But what we have to have is the ability to be an intelligent client and to then bring expertise in to help support us in some of that work, David. That's important to me. But yeah, I'm really keen to sort of evolve where we've come from to be a forward-looking, enabling regulator. You know, yes, to hold industry to account, yes, to take action where we need to, but also to collaborate and support industry too. I see us as being part of the solution as part of that, and I think we try and sort of muck in where we can to do that, whilst also respecting that independent regulatory piece. And that can sometimes be challenging, I think, but we do work really closely with industry, and we've got some really good relationships.
Good, right. We've got about 10 minutes, so I'll throw it open to see if there's any questions from the audience. Raise your hands if anyone's got anything. Yeah, I think young man at the front was the first hand, and then we'll go to gentleman further back.
Other than ETCS, where it's not practical to be fitted, what other engineering mitigations are you looking at for overspeed?
Yeah, so it's a diverse range of things, I think. I didn't get your name, sorry. Winter. Nice to meet you. So I think the solution to overspeed is not just technology, to be honest. I think it's a spectrum of things. So on the operator side of things, I suspect there will be some local routes with some drivers that requires some increase in input and kind of awareness for them that would probably solve some of the issues. On the other end of the scale, there probably is going to be some junctions and particular locations that would benefit from some quite significant investment. But this is not an easy thing to fix. If it was, it would have been done way before I got here, because you know, you can make changes to junctions, which is where these events tend to happen, but you've got to be really careful not to create, for example, a SPAD trap. So it's got to be a really considered piece of work to oversee this. And the industry isn't a constrained funding environment. That's really clear. This is not the only thing that the industry needs to focus on. So what I'm after is a kind of data-led approach whereby industry has a really good understanding of the risk profile on overspeed. So we have on-train data recorders. Do we use that information to populate the risk profile? Not really. Is there more options around how we can use data on the system to understand the risk profile? Absolutely. Why aren't we doing it? That's the challenge I've laid. So once we understand the risk profile and we've got the data to underpin it, we can be really clinical in making the investment and kind of securing the biggest bang for the buck, which is important in this funding environment. But I'm really clear, it's a spectrum of things. It's not just about infrastructure, it's operators, it's the whole system together. But the thing that's been missing is the cooperation between infrastructure manager and operator. There's a particular part of the law that requires it, and it's not being met, is the hard reality.
Are there signs that over the last few months there is starting to be some movement, and you are maybe less unhappy than you were?
Yeah, I'm not always grumpy, David.
You said you were very unhappy about it earlier on, so that's why I was just...
I wouldn't say I'm happy.
No, that's why I went less
maybe
unhappy.
less unhappy.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe that's fair. So look, I think there has been a positive response. I think there has definitely been a step up from infrastructure managers, from operators, to recognise the issue. There is a really good piece of work going on now around risk assessments, joint risk assessments on junctions to understand the particular issue and what needs to be done. The leadership forum is changing. There's going to be an announcement in the next few weeks about how that's going to be kind of developed further to make sure the right people are in the room to make the right decisions. So yes, there has been a positive response, but the challenge is, have we addressed or influenced the risk profile out on the system yet? And the answer is no. So that's where we need to get to. It's about what's out there on the system.
Yeah, great. I think you had a question, sir.
Eben Kuyvet, Network Rail. I'm sorry, I have a very complex lead into the question.
Go for it. I'll try my best.
So, if we think about very famous disaster, the Titanic, everyone says, oh, not enough lifeboats. Lifeboats weren't very much used before about 1912, because you're going to be bobbing around on an ocean when nobody knows where you are, you die. And it's only the advent of wireless telegraphy that makes bobbing around on an ocean for a few hours until you're picked up a practical proposition. So you don't put lots of lifeboats on because it's kind of better to drown than starve to death. What's our equivalent of that? What new technology has come in that we aren't taking advantage of properly yet?
Do you know, I never thought about the Titanic when it came to overspeed, I have to say. So I'll have to think it through. I think there are a couple of things then. So driver advisory systems currently are not fully used across the system, and they are advisory. Does that mean that they couldn't be used for a safety-related function to make the driver aware of a set of circumstances? Probably yes. I think I've mentioned the fact that we have on-train data recorders that are used for driver assessment purposes, investigation purposes. Why don't we turn that around and use it as a leading indicator rather than a lagging indicator? What's stopping us with that? I mean, to their great credit, I have to say, ASLEF have been really supportive of this work, as have the RMT. They see the challenge, they see the issue, they want to lean into it. So I think in the right circumstances with the right controls, that data could be harvested to form an overall risk profile. And in some parts of the system, it's happening already. So the Elizabeth line, for example, have got something called MyDrive, and it enables the driver to have an appraisal of their performance, but it's for them only, if you like. It's not for the company, so it gives them a protection. That's been quite helpful because it encourages the tea room conversations, the you've got a red but I've got a yellow kind of assessment. That's helpful. But what it can also do is be harvested at a depot level, so you can get a really rich understanding of what's happening in the locality. So not just overspeed, but things like dispatch. Are you dispatching within half a second, for example, of being given the proceed? And all those things are really helpful, so I think that's good. I think there's also not just overspeed, but some other tech that would help us with things like SPAD, for example. So I'll put it out there, magnetic track brakes, for example. You look at Europe, you look at tram systems, they are prevalent on the network. We don't have that in the UK. What's the issue with that? Why don't we look at exploring that? Are there things that we could do? The Telurthig report was published yesterday, wasn't it? Or this morning, in fact, by the RAIB. that talks about adhesion-related issues. So even ETCS relies on the train sticking to the track.
Yeah. It sounds like then just that it's a mix of new technology, but also making better use of also the existing tech.
Agree?
Yeah.
And things like driver competence, yeah.
Yeah. We'll come to over there, and then we'll come to you, sir.
Hi, Abby.
Hi, Richard. Abby Patterson, Network Rail. You've talked a lot about current priorities for the industry and the risks of change. And I just wondered, from a practical perspective, are there any specifics you'd be looking for the industry to be focused on during this period of change? And as the regulator, what will you be watching out for that might be early warning signs that this change is not going as we would have hoped?
Yeah, I think that's a really excellent question. So I'll cut it in three parts then. So the first thing is about the leadership. So I think industry is really busy at the minute. You talk to any senior leader, they are fully loaded. So leadership fatigue, having the headspace to think through implications to make sure the job is being done properly, the connection with the front line, I've mentioned a few times, I think that's really important. So we need leadership engaged, we need leadership focused on the front line, we need leadership to make sure things are being done. That's super important. I'm going to say something in the annual health and safety report about assurance in July, because I think we do a lot of assurance as an industry. I think a lot of that, though, is desk-based, and I think there's quite a lot of paperwork that exists. So does assurance reflect operational reality is a question that I am going to ask the industry. It's rhetorical, because I think there's probably too much done on a desktop basis and probably not enough done out on ballast, if I'm honest, or in the control room or whatever the equivalent would be. So assurance grounded in operational reality is a point. I think you can go further than that. There's arrangements grounded in operational reality. So track worker safety, for example, I suppose everyone will know about the fact there's been a fatality recently in really sad circumstances. And it's been a number of years since we've had that, on the back of the really excellent work the Network Rail did post those terrible incidents in Margam and Surbiton. But that risk and the number of near misses is still there, and it's still really stubborn. So that's got to be a focus area. There's work being done on that. There's a Safety Task Force 2 being developed to address some of those issues, and that's a really welcome thing, but it's still there. So yeah, things like work packs, do they reflect reality? If somebody gives me a 30-page document to work through, I'll probably take in the first page, and then the rest of it is probably a bit of a blur in some instances. So are we presenting those things in a way that's really helpful to colleagues that have to use them? Things like orientation out in the system, lots of examples of where people have been put to work in a location with a possession but ended up several miles away in a different location, for example. None of that is right. In terms of what we're looking for, Abby, I think we're looking at lots of things, and we're going to be really vigilant over the next year. So we're looking for the sort of, I suppose, the small things that we see across the system that might give us a sense that there's a distraction, or there are perhaps people in frontline roles not discharging their obligations. I actually think, in terms of the transition from the last day of current arrangements to GBR day one, the actual change will be quite small, because it will probably be the same people doing broadly the same activities, broadly within the same set of arrangements. I wonder if, in fact, the risk is a bit later down the line when we start to embed some of the real change and some of this really starts to bite. So is it day one, or is it before day one? Is it day one, or is it, in fact, going to be 9, 12, 18 months after? So it won't just be that immediate window we're looking at.
Great. I think we've probably got time for one more. So if you say microphones...
Ian Darby from Jafco. So we were one of the companies that led on BS 8020 over 20 years ago, I believe, 30 years ago, which is electrical hand tools, so shovels. So we're taking you back to the other end of the spectrum away from AI. Currently, we are having tools returned to us with our CAT number that we have supplied, which we have been issued from Network Rail. They're not our products. People are able to access our CAT number and provide tools. We get them back. We say, well, why have you sent us this? It's not a Jafco tool. And they say, well, because it's come in on your CAT number. Well, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll electrically test it like we do with every tool that we provide to you. And it fails. There is a man holding that shovel. He's been using it because it's failed. How can that happen?
Yeah, so electricity at work regulations 1989 is really specific about tools, isn't it, and protective equipment used.
Hire companies, they're
Yeah.
buying in cheaper tools and hiring them to tier 1 people under cap numbers.
Yeah, okay. So I think that's an issue to take up with Network Rail specifically in terms of that particular problem, and I can put you in touch. Yeah, and I think in light of that knowledge, we will ask some questions around it, and we will kind of get some assurance that the controls are in place. But yeah, I think any tool that's used for work on your electrical system, the law is really clear. It's got to be fit for purpose, and we would expect to see some of the things that you've mentioned to be in place to make sure it's fit for purpose. Because yeah, 25 kV overheads, underground lines, for example, there ain't a lot of margin for error.
Correct. We are very concerned that it is going to take a fatality.
Okay.
For this to actually pull to the surface and actually make a statement to somebody.
Yeah.
We're getting too many parts back now that are failing.
So you should speak to me after this, and we'll have a conversation about it. And you can report it to us too. But I would encourage you to raise it with Network Rail.
We're currently working on an upgrade to BS18.
Fine.
Yeah, great.
Thank
Good.
you. Yeah,
Right,
cheers.
I think we're just after 2 o'clock, so we will, well, thank you to Richard, and give him a round of applause. Yeah. And you'll be around for the rest of the afternoon if you've got anything else you want to pick up with him afterward. Thank you.
Thanks, David.
Next session,
Thanks, everyone.
quarter of an hour about freight traction.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.